We all have hobbies. I happen to be a psychology buff, but what are you good at? Athletics? Art? Science? Gaming? Well, whatever your craft may be, there's bound to be specific terms and phrases that are only recognizable to those who are also familiar with the craft. Maybe you're really good at your craft, so much so that you could be called a master. As with the unique language specific to the craft, there's bound to be a unique method of signifying one's status as a master, and this symbol is likely to be granted by a collective body comprised of distinguished masters in the field. Now, becoming a master in any field requires many years of diligent study. I would even suggest that it may take an entire lifetime. Therefore, it's really impossible for any one person to achieve mastery in everything, especially considering that most of us, including myself, are extremely unlikely to master even one craft in our lifetime. Consequently, we common folk are often reduced to referencing recognized authority figures in order to support our beliefs and positions. Although referencing authority figures is often necessary, it can be very dangerous. After all, we wouldn't be quoting an authority figure if we actually knew for ourselves. So not only can we be fooled in our interpretation of the work of experts, but maybe the experts are mistaken themselves. If we have to use authority figures, it's imperative that we understand what makes an authority credible, as well as how to quote them properly. So let's look at a few bad examples. First, meet Kary Mullis, a molecular biologist best known for his work on polymerase chain reactions, or PCR. Now, PCR is a biomedical technology used to replicate DNA. It's capable of generating thousands to millions of copies of a particular DNA sequence. Mullis began developing PCR in 1983, and 2 years later the technique was released. Over the next 5 years, more than 1,000 research reports included PCR, and as a result of the overwhelming success of the technique, Mullis was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1993. Now, Nobel Prize nominations are usually withheld for 50 years, and this is done in order to ensure the significance and the authenticity of the achievements in question. However, the work of Dr. Mullis was so substantial, and it provided such repeatable results, that the prize was awarded a mere 8 years after disclosure. Not without controversy, of course. Now, with such an impressive accomplishment and contribution to the field, Mullis may at first glance appear to be a credible authority figure. However, an individual's brilliance in one particular field does not guarantee consistently reasonable perspectives. In his 1998 autobiography, Mullis reveals that he disagrees with the scientific consensus regarding climate change and ozone depletion. He also supports AIDS denialist Peter Duesberg. He has no problem admitting to using LSD, and he even attributes the development of PCR to his use of the illegal hallucinogenic drug. Mullis also wrote about his strange experience with what he believes was a glow-in-the-dark, multidimensional raccoon. Oddly enough, Mullis completely denies the possibility of LSD having anything to do with this particular experience. Now, Mullis may have a Nobel Prize, and he may be a brilliant chemist, but he appears to have very poor critical thinking skills, no sense of skepticism, very poor work ethics, and delusions of grandeur. All recipes for a very bad authority figure. Next, let's meet Michael Behe, a biochemist. In 2005, he was a key witness for the defense in the famous case of Kitzmiller versus Dover. His task was to support the pseudoscience of intelligent design with his theory called irreducible complexity. Now, Behe uses what I call the mousetrap defense, and it goes like this. A mousetrap has several parts, and they are all required for the mousetrap to function as intended. If you remove any one of the parts, it's no longer capable of catching mice. Therefore, it must have been intelligently designed. Likewise, Behe believes that there are biological systems with interconnected parts of such complexity that they could not have evolved, and therefore life was ultimately designed with intent. This is a terrible argument, but Behe's favorite example of irreducible complexity is, of course, the bacteria flagellum.
Have other scientists acknowledged these design features of the flagellum?
Yes, they have. If you could advance the next slide. In 1998, a man named David de Rosier wrote an article in the journal Cell. Now, in that article, he makes a statement, quote, "More so than other motors, the flagellum resembles a machine designed by a human," close quote. So David de Rosier also recognizes that the structure of the flagellum appears designed.
What I wrote was, this is a machine that looks like it was designed by a human, but that doesn't mean it was designed. That is the product of intelligent design. Indeed, this more has all the earmarks of something that arose by evolution. about what it means to be irreducibly complex, the argument is that if you take away even one of these proteins, that the structure cannot function. And yet here is a structure that functions, that is missing several of the proteins, and yet here it is, a working viable organelle of the bacterium. So indeed, this structure is not, in that sense, irreducibly complex.
To emphasize de Rosier's point, Miller arrived at court making an unusual fashion statement.
As an example of what irreducible complexity means, advocates of intelligent design like to point to a very common machine, the mousetrap. What I have right here is a mousetrap from which I've removed 2 of the 5 parts. I still have the base plate, the spring, and the hammer. Now you can't catch any mice with this, so it's not a very good mousetrap. But it turns out that despite the missing parts, it makes a perfectly good, if somewhat inelegant, tie clip.
Michael Behe deliberately misrepresented David de Rosier's research, and his mousetrap analogy was thoroughly debunked by the prosecution. Yet in 2007 he goes on the Colbert Report to give the same arguments as if he was completely unaware of the court hearing 2 years earlier. Just because someone like Behe has a PhD, it doesn't mean that they're qualified as an authority, nor does it mean that they're honest. After all, it's actually the data that matters, not the individual presenting it. A good authority is not necessarily brilliant. They just have to have a good track record of honestly and accurately representing the data. A good authority will not speak as an authority outside of their area of specific training. A good authority will promptly acknowledge when they are wrong when new data emerges to falsify their claims. And furthermore, a good authority will cite their source in a particular format that will allow others to easily check their information. They include author names, titles, dates, publications, volume numbers, and page numbers. Now, in summation, here are some red flags to watch out for. Number 1. What else does your potential authority figure believe and publicly advocate? If your authority figure is a Bigfoot hunter, an AIDS denialist, or a homeopath, you should be skeptical. Strange beliefs do not mean that an individual should never be trusted, but it does mean that the probability of any one of their assertions as being false is dramatically increased. Number 2. Does your authority admit when they are wrong? A good scientist has no problem admitting when they are wrong if it becomes apparent. People like Michael Behe, on the other hand, refuse to admit when they are wrong. Number 3. Does your authority quote others out of context and/or flat-out lie? Again, Michael Behe quoted David de Rosier out of context on purpose and continued to peddle his snake oil to the general public even after a judge and jury saw through his shenanigans. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm an amateur. I'm no authority figure. Maybe if I work hard enough over the next couple decades, I can one day contribute to my chosen field of study. In the meantime, I'll have to reference authority figures when my current level of understanding and training in a given subject is inadequate. Nobody's perfect, but if we focus less on achieving perfection and focus more on sharpening our skepticism, then in the future, we'll be far less likely to make bad decisions based on false assumptions.